A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we do like to welcome the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle Pearse, the CEO, is with us. Hey, Michelle, welcome back to 2020.
Hi, thanks for having me again, Neil.
Michelle, I've got to start off with what some are thinking, well, the dust is beginning to settle, but of course there's still a passageway through to becoming the president, but Donald Trump's won the US election. What are your impressions of what went last week?
Look, we see it as a massive rejection of the woke ideology, the overreach of the left. And this isn't just us saying it because these issues are kind of in our camp, but a lot of commentators, even those that usually, commentate on economic issues or environmental issues, are attributing this to their loss. And I think woke ideology, can mean a lot of things. But I think in this case that the everyday person in America is just really tired of political correctness, and how this has led to foolishness really in public policy, in healthcare and education, and even I think in the corporate sector in the US with their version of diversity, equity and inclusion policies. So I think political correctness is seen as something for the elites now, and the everyday person, just wants you to tell them straight.
What do we make of the thought that, do away with the DEI and there's a real, maybe it's a backlash against the woke agenda? Because a lot of listeners will be thinking, well, isn't the woke agenda front and centre, both at our federal politics and in our state politics? Does this mean there's going to be some special effect on the way Australians will be thinking about these things? What are your thoughts here?
I think it definitely will have an effect of the way that major parties are thinking about their own campaigns in the lead up to the federal election. I think particularly that Democrats, like our Labor Party here, have traditionally been seen as the party of the working class. But through, this woke political correctness that they've adopted, they've actually become more of the party of the elites, like I just said, big business and Hollywood and so forth. But Trump's rejection of political correctness has now placed the Republican Party really as the party of the working class instead of the Democrats. So I hope that the Labor Party do see that, with what they're pushing, that they could become this, for seen to be the party of the elites rather than the party for the people. So I think this overreach and the way it's affecting the everyday Australian, our parents with their kids in school, their kids being confronted with gender ideology, with people in the workplace, being confronted with all of these diversity, equity, inclusion policies. So there's a reaction against it, and that could change the way that people see the major parties.
It won't be until the 20th of January that Donald Trump actually takes control and the presidency will be his again. I'm always, impressed or dismayed when the new incoming US president sits there and there's this big pile of folders, and each one of those has some special new law that they're signing in, really from the very first day that they take control. I can't help but think what happens, and this was what happened when Joe Biden took power, it was repeal, repeal, repeal. All of those things that Donald Trump brought in. And no doubt Donald Trump is going to sit there at a desk and there'll be all sorts of footage and there'll be a big pile of new laws that he's just signing into, this is the way we're going, repeal, repeal, repeal. That repeal doesn't always seem to resonate in Australia because all sorts of stuff happens, but we're not seeing those new governments coming in and perhaps repealing some of the crazy things that have brought about even criminalising Christianity. What are your thoughts here around the thoughts that repeal might be somewhere on the agenda of our governments here, given what happens in America?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that the US policy and what's happening in the US, we're not there yet, but traditionally we get there, that will be our story soon. And so I think that those pushes to repeal laws will certainly be taking a number of laws to Peter Dutton, in this federal election campaign, asking him to repeal certain laws. We've been pushing in all the different states. In the Northern Territory, the COP have committed to repeal some of their changes to anti-discrimination law. We're having conversations with the LNP in Queensland for them to repeal some changes to anti-discrimination laws there. So there is a push for it, but we just need to get some more momentum behind it to show the real damage that these laws are having on the freedom of not only Christians, but freedom of expression expression and freedom of conscience and so forth. So I think the pressure is building. We're not there yet, but we will come to a point where we're going to have to unwind a lot of damage that has been done because of woke ideology, the overreach of the left, political correctness, which is stifling just the ability for people to just do their job and send their kids to school without their education becoming politicised.
A lot of this, I can't help but saying, just boil this down to some simple things. What is a woman? And, boys and girls are different. The way that we think about marriage between a man and a woman, those sorts of things, which sound simple, but they are profound, and those things have been upset. But the evidence is growing so far as, issues around gender-affirming care. There's been a Kozlowska report on gender care. What is that saying to Australians?
Yeah, so this is a preliminary report and we're waiting for the full release. But this is groundbreaking because the authors include a couple of lead clinicians at the former gender clinic at Sydney's Westmead Hospital, which was leading the way, on this at some point. And so the report actually reveals the way the rights-based approach, which is what Australia has adopted, rights-based to trans medicine, actually conflicts with an evidence-based approach. So under the rights-based approach, the medicine really takes the child's lead. If a child believes that they should transition, then this approach believes it's their right to do so, and so medicine will support their right to transition. So that includes taking the puberty blockers, then taking cross-sex hormones, and then going on to surgery. So medicine makes this possible for kids. But the evidence-based approach, which is what we're seeing in the UK with the CAS review, and then a number of other European countries follow suit, that leads to a banning of the medication because the evidence reveals that this medicine is harmful. So we're seeing the gender affirmation ideology or this rights-based approach enter into public policy, compromising the evidence base for healthcare and so forth in things like our conversion therapy laws. Now, this really compromises the ability of healthcare professionals to offer proper care to kids that are often struggling with a whole range of mental health issues, but being unable to really take kids on that pathway of care to address their mental health issues because the conversion therapy laws forces kids onto a gender affirmation pathway.
And I think, no one's going to be ignorant of the fact that this is not the first bit of evidence. This is now compounding evidence, isn't it, insofar as these gender affirmation care procedures go. Let me just ask you, though, health ministers, driven by ideology rather than by common sense and even care for our young people here, I know you're quoted as saying that health ministers need to stop fobbing the Australian public off with non-answers to urgent questions. Have we really been getting fobbed off?
They're passing the buck, saying this isn't a state issue, this is federal issue. If the federal guy's saying this isn't a federal issue, this is a state issue, somebody needs to take responsibility. This is happening at every level of healthcare within our nation. And following the lead from international evidence, we absolutely need a national inquiry. I mean, we have people that are writing our guidelines that are compromised by this rights-based approach and are stifling the gathering of evidence and even not really revealing what's happening within these gender clinics. So we need to expose this because this is children's lives. Children are being mutilated. And, when we're looking to countries like the US and what's happening there, they're having to undo a lot of these policies to make it illegal for health practitioners to, force kids or encourage kids on this pathway. So we need an inquiry to expose this. And we believe that once the evidence is revealed, that puberty blockers will be banned in Australia.
Michelle, can't help but think that in the US presidential election, Kamala Harris had abortion front and centre as one of the main planks for her election campaign. And, of course, that has failed. I understand that here in Australia that Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, has been speaking in the media on abortion. Is it likely that this issue might be even front and centre in the next upcoming federal election here?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we learn lessons from the US. It didn't work out for Kamala. I mean, she was pushing for full access to abortion. And with Kamala, there was no nuancing in her campaign. Like, I think it would have been reasonable for her, even if she was pro-choice, to take a position that healthy babies shouldn't be aborted right up until the day they can be delivered. It was full access and no talk of any restrictions whatsoever. And that was clearly her policy priority. And I think that really cost her the election. We've got a lot of Christians and Catholics who would vote for a pro-life president, but I don't think it goes the other way. There's not a large proportion of the population that are going to vote for a party simply because they're pro-abortion. So, yeah, unfortunately, this was just before the Trump election outcome, but Dutton, it was leaked from the party room that he believes that the abortion issue actually detracted votes from the LNP in Queensland, and we know that the coalition needs Queensland to win the federal election. But then he's also to be saying that he doesn't think Bader votes one way or the other, so I'm not sure where he stands, but he did pressure.
Michelle, let me ask you about the federal hate crimes bill. There's some troublesome definitions that perhaps Christians need to be aware is in there, and they need some clarification.
That's right. So this is in committee stage in the federal parliament at the moment. It's a federal hate crimes bill which amends other legislation. But because we're seeing an increasing amount of lawfare by activists who are opposed to us ideologically, we're really concerned that if legislation isn't tightly and narrowly defined to capture the intent of the legislation, which is real harm and violence and threats to violence, that thresholds for harm are lowered, definitions are vague, and then these laws can be easily manipulated to suit an agenda. So within this bill, the list of protected attributes are being expanded, like we're seeing in changes all over the nation, to include sexual orientation and gender identity. But in this bill, if a member of a group feels targeted by someone's what's called recklessness or reckless speech in a way that could lead to harm, and in this bill, harm is undefined, so perhaps that could mean psychological harm, then the person who was reckless in their speech, and if they're found guilty, could attract a criminal penalty and even imprisonment. So in this legislation, the word reckless actually replaces the word incitement. So when you use the word incitement, that means imminent risk to physical violence. It's a high threshold. But reckless is actually a lower threshold. It's more like potential risk to, and what could be psychological harm. So this bill actually also bans symbols. And we know that there are really harmful symbols out there in the community. We've seen them within the protests and the anti-Semitism and so forth. But this symbol, banning symbols, but then also putting sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected attribute, could a symbol of sexual purity offend the trans community, or could the cross offend perhaps secularists? So we are on dangerous grounds when we lower thresholds to subjective definitions when the real harm of incitement to violence, I think the real threat is racist things, anti-Semitism, and symbols that lead that way. And that's where the battle is. But when you ban all symbols that may offend, then we're on dangerous ground.
And one more issue, time is short, the misinformation, disinformation bill that we've been talking about for a long time now. And the threats that has, because there'll be a bureaucrat somewhere in Canberra deciding on what's true and what's false, so far as misinformation, disinformation. Well, it has progressed through the House of Representatives last week, not in the Senate yet. What's the danger here, Michelle?
Yeah, that's right. So the Senate committee is only due to report on the 25th of November, so I'm hoping it will be held off from the Senate before then. The threat is that it will be rushed through in the last week of sitting week for the year. But that doesn't give the Senate any time to consider the report. The crossbenchers really need to get across it quickly. And just to remind listeners, our main argument is that the Australian Communications and Media Authority, under this legislation, if it passes, will require the digital platform providers to take down mis and disinformation, but it's according to the legal definition of serious harm. So there's big problems with this because the proposed definition for serious harm is incredibly broad and vague. And then the penalties, if digital platforms don't comply, are extremely exorbitant. So vague definitions of serious harm coupled with these severe penalties are a recipe for over-censorship. So we're really concerned that issues that we speak about online, we believe the things we say are helpful and necessary, but those of opposing ideologies may view them as harmful, and according to the definitions of serious harm, they could be deemed as harmful. And so we'll be at risk of those being censored. And then not just our views, but this extends to economic views or views on health or other political matters. So it really is a risk to the freedom of expression and freedom of speech of all Australians. So we all need to weigh in on this and have our say.
Okay, well, for listeners to follow through some more and utilise the resource that you can find with the Australian Christian Lobby on all of these very, very current issues, you might want to check out acl.org.au. That's the website of the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au. Michelle Pearse is the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.